The Death of Time by ShayaLonnie, Chapter 5, Sad Sitting Sods. August 1st, 1997. Careful there, Hermione said as she approached Sirius, taking the seat beside him at the large round table in the back of the marquee. The table was flanked by empty chairs, and half-empty bottles of butterbeer dotted the play setting that surrounded them. Everyone else under the tent was on their feet dancing beneath the floating candles that lit up the room, enjoying the company and congratulating Bill and Fleur. Sirius eyed Hermione curiously. Careful of what? Careful, or you might bury yourself so deep in this misery you're wallowing in that you'll come out the other side cheerful. She leaned over and gently bumped his shoulder with her own, drawing a small smile out of him. Her own smile was bright and joyful, and her eyes sparkled. He raised an amused brow at her. How many butterbeers have you had? 3, but that's beside the point. Sirius chuckled at what a lightweight she was as he took a sip from the small glass of fire whiskey on the table in front of him, letting the liquid roll over his tongue pleasantly before swallowing and cherishing the familiar heat that burned its way down his throat. Hermione looked out at the crowd and laughed quietly, pointing out Ron uncomfortably trying to dance with Luna Lovegood, who was obviously quite content to dance by herself. The strange twirling moves the girl was making had no need for a partner. I told him that he should ask her to dance. I think he's regretting listening to me. How come you're not out there? Sirius asked her, eyeing her lilac-colored dress, amused by the ridiculously uncomfortable shoes she was wearing. How come you're sitting here? She countered. He tipped his glass to her. You first. Nervous, she shrugged. But even if we weren't in the middle of the war and preparing to leave any day now, I'd still be sitting here. The last time I was asked to dance, I was 15, and that man, she said, pointing to a large bloke with a short beard and fancy robes, was my date. She buried a reminiscing laugh in her palm, leaning closer as she continued to speak, as though she were sharing a secret. He spoke little, made my friends angry, and couldn't even pronounce my name. Sirius briefly narrowed his eyes at the unmistakable face of Victor Crumb, remembering exaggerated articles in Witch Weekly and the Daily Prophet about the love triangle encompassing his godson, the Little Witch, and the famed Bulgarian seeker. To hide his mild irritation, Sirius returned his attention to Hermione and smirked. You afraid he's going to ask you to dance? She shook her head emphatically. I made sure that the second he walked through the door, Fred and George introduced him to Fleur's Villa cousins. She pointed to 2 blonde women, batting their eyelashes at Crumb. Fred and George were lingering nearby, most likely waiting for Victor to choose a girl, thereby leaving the twins to pick up the pieces of a broken heart left behind by the Quidditch star. So, instead of finding someone else to dance with, you've come to keep company with sad sod sitting in the corner? Ah, but why is the... I'm not saying that, she insisted, shaking her head. Why are you sad and sitting in the corner? She watched his movements as though she would be able to visibly discern if he were lying. Ever since she had brought him back from the Vale, Sirius noticed Hermione keeping a close watch on him. While the Weasleys were left preparing for the wedding and following orders given by their matriarch, Hermione and Harry would sneak off to Remus and Tonks' home to visit Sirius. It was easier to make plans for the approaching year when visiting Sirius, as Molly had put a hard stop on the trio organizing their Horcrux hunting trip. Harry and Hermione now had to work on the details outside the burrow, and because Harry absolutely refused to keep him in the dark about anything, Sirius quickly made the former trio into a quartet. I'm sad because I don't like weddings, he admitted. Spent much of my childhood attending them in uncomfortable robes. Hence your rebellious sartorial selection? Hermione gestured to his leather jacket and trousers. Leather looks good for any occasion, Sirius winked, grinning when he saw her blush. It amused him to no end that despite being tipsy, she could still use multi-syllabic words to answer your question. Yes, I avoid dress robes unless absolutely necessary. Not that I don't have them or look good in them. I look fan-fucking-tastic in dress robes, he said smugly, taking another sip of his drink. Most of the weddings were for cousins, aunts, and uncles of mine, all destined to marry one another. He chuckled as he watched Hermione flinch at the notion of the Black family's tradition of inbreeding, or they were married off to the worst type of people to ever exist, like the Malfoys and Lestranges. "I'll drink to that." Hermione reached for his glass of fire whiskey, took a sip, and then proceeded to immediately choke on it. Sirius laughed and pulled the glass away from her. He stood up and beckoned for a passing server carrying a large tray of champagne. "Here, it's not water, but it's better than choking." "That was awful," Hermione grimaced, even after she had rinsed the taste from her mouth. "How can you drink that?" Sirius smiled thoughtfully, old memories burning in his chest. "You get used to it. Fire whiskey holds a special place in my heart." He swirled the amber beverage in his tumbler, watching the candlelight sparkle through the color. It was his favorite color. Too many years had passed since he had seen a certain pair of amber eyes staring back at him. "Well, at least my brush with death got you to smile." Hermione's voice brought Sirius back from his memories. "So, you don't like weddings?" Sirius frowned. "Only ever been to one good one." "Harry's parents?" He nodded. "Was it beautiful?" "Of course it was. Lily was gorgeous as always. James was nervous as expected. We kept him well plied with fire whiskey just to get him down the aisle." He laughed at the memory, absent-mindedly fingering a small silver chain that hung around his neck. Hermione's eyes widened. "He had to be drunk to get married? That's awful." "No, he had to be drunk to be convinced that Lily wasn't going to change her mind." Sirius chuckled, recalling his best friend's ridiculous pre-wedding panic. "Spent the whole night at our..." He paused in frustration before correcting himself. "My flat, pacing back and forth, going over a list of reasons why Lily would bolt at the last second." Hermione put her elbows on the table, resting her head in her hand and smiling at the story. "But she didn't." "Absolutely not. By that point, the two of them were so besotted with one another that it was hard to be around them." Sirius smiled brightly at the memory for just a moment before it faded into a melancholic frown. "And then they got married, had a wonderful honeymoon, came home, and life turned to shit." "They had Harry," Hermione argued. "Perhaps not everything was shit, as you call it." "Harry was a good thing in a really bad time," Sirius agreed. "After James and Lily got married, he sighed and rubbed the bridge of his nose in frustration. "I'm sorry," Hermione said, frowning. "I didn't mean to bring up bad memories. I actually came over here to cheer you up." "It's all right, kitten." Sirius reached for her hand, giving it a light squeeze before letting go. "That's what you do. You try to fix everyone. Just remember that you're not always going to make everyone happy. It's not your job to fix the world. He paused, looking down at his glass, making a decision. He tossed the fire whiskey back as he stood, holding his hand out to her. "Come on." "Come where?" she asked, pulling away from him. He reached for her again, undeterred. "Here, you, come dance." Hermione laughed, shaking her head. "Absolutely not." "You're adorable. You thought that was a request." He snatched her hand, yanked her to her feet, and dragged her out onto the dance floor. Hermione struggled the entire way, nearly tripping over her high heels in the process, cursing his name as they moved. "Sirius Black, I will get you for this." "Oh, kitten has claws." He grinned and pulled her up against him, close enough that he could see the various shades of brown in her eyes. From far away they looked like chocolate, but up close like this, with the light reflecting in them, they could look like fire whiskey, if he wished hard enough. Hermione narrowed those intoxicating eyes at him as he gripped her hand in one of his, placing the other on her small waist and spinning her in his arms. Within seconds, Sirius had her laughing and slapping his chest painfully. "Well, how about that? I might like weddings." "Ah, my devious plan worked," Hermione smiled triumphantly. "I'm glad you're smiling again, Sirius." "Me too, kitten, me too." Hermione eyed him. "Have I mentioned that I hate nicknames?" "It's a pet name, not a nickname," he argued as he took her hand and spun her out carefully before tugging her back against him. smiling when she tilted her head back and laughed. The sound drowned out the music playing, and it lit him up from inside. Besides, haven't you noticed I don't always do what people want me to do? Sirius Black? No, I thought he was the very perfect model of obedience and consideration, she said sarcastically. I am very considerate. For instance, despite the fact that you are enjoying dancing with me so much. She laughed again. So much. I am going to part with you, even though it's obvious that you want to keep dancing with me all night, he added. Who could blame you? I am very handsome. Despite being only a little sarcastic, she did not laugh, but instead locked her gaze on him, causing him to lick his lips. Clearing his throat and his head, Sirius maneuvered around another couple. I do this because I am so very considerate of the fact that I am not the only sad sod sitting alone in the corner. He gestured to Remus, who was leaning against the entrance to the marquee by himself, a glass of fire whiskey in hand. He's not sitting or in a corner, Hermione argued. Fine. Sirius rolled his eyes. Sad sod standing at the door. And you're leaving me to go be sad together? On the contrary, my dear kitten, he stressed the word with a smile that he felt brighten as her eyes narrowed. You've put an end to my corner-sitting, sodding sadness, and I wish to share the gift of your dance moves with others. Moony, come, cut in. She can't keep up with me. Hermione suddenly looked a perfect mixture of embarrassed and angry, and Sirius grinned, pulling her close to him as he waved Remus over. His friend raised a brow, seeming hesitant to participate in Hermione's humiliation. Sirius sent him a mischievous grin, silently communicating that if he did not intervene soon, Sirius would only go and make things worse. Setting his glass down on a nearby table, Remus approached the dancing couple. Having fun, Padfoot? Sirius took the moment to dip Hermione, drawing an unexpected laugh. He felt something in his chest tighten when her hands clung to the lapels of his leather jacket. Best wedding I've been to in years, Remus, he said as he sat Hermione upright once again. I'm sure yours was fine and fancy. Then again, seeing as I wasn't invited to it. You were dead at the time, Remus interjected. I have decided to let you make it up to me by occupying this young witch's dance card in my stead. Sirius took Hermione's hand and placed it in Remus's. Sighing in resignation, Remus gently led Hermione back to the dance floor as Sirius grinned at them and walked over to join Harry and Ron. The two young men were sitting at their table and watching the scene with amused expressions, having a good-natured chuckle at Hermione's expense. You look weird, polyjuiced, he said to Harry, ruffling the boy's currently red hair. Harry laughed. You look weird in leather trousers. Sirius snorted in amusement and gave Harry's shoulder a playful shove before taking a seat at the nearest table. Bugger off, the two of you. Go find some pretty witches to dance with. I'd rather get another butterbeer, Ron said, looking awkward as Luna passed by them. As the boys vanished into the crowd, wearing smiles that warmed Sirius's heart, he turned his focus to Hermione and Remus, watching them attentively as they swayed to the music. Using his animagus senses, Sirius concentrated on the pair, having no remorse about eavesdropping. How much has he had to drink? Remus asked. Hermione shook her head. I don't want to know, but he didn't step on my toes during our dance, so I think he'll be okay. You would be surprised the number of things that man can do while properly intoxicated, Remus chuckled softly, pulling her closer. You look lovely, by the way. Lilac is a good color on you. Thank you, Remus. Even from where he was sitting, Sirius caught the sudden blush on her cheeks. Where's Tonks? On duty. I offered to join her, but she insisted that I enjoy myself. He said the words as though they were a punchline to a joke. Happy wife, happy life. I try, Remus said with an amused little smile that faded slowly as it was replaced by a haunted look. Keep them out of trouble, will you? I know you'll be leaving soon, and it's dangerous for each of you. They'll be after all of you, because of Harry. They'll be after Ron for truancy, you for being muggle-born, and Sirius because he hasn't come into the ministry yet after everyone found out he's alive. He shouldn't even be here right now. If you four have to be out, try and keep him in his animagus form, please. "I will," she promised. "I'll take care of them, Remus." Sirius looked away from the couple, feelings of unease returning to him. He understood where Remus was coming from, but that didn't mean he wanted Hermione to feel responsible for his own actions. Then again, he would not put it past his best friend to assume he was listening in on their conversation and use this moment to drill it into his head to be especially careful, considering everything they both had to lose. "I know you will," Remus said, "but please take care of yourself, Hermione. If something were to happen to you..." A silver light burst into the marquee, pulling Sirius's attention away from the couple. The Patronus landed in the shape of a lynx, and everyone turned to get a good look at the large cat, its mouth open wide, and it spoke in the loud, deep voice of Kingsley Shacklebolt. "The ministry has fallen. Scrimgeour is dead. They are coming." Silence spread outward in cold ripples from the place where the Patronus had landed. Then somebody screamed, and everyone panicked, rushing toward the exit. Sirius's first instinct was to look for Hermione, who he saw being pushed towards him by Remus. Walking steadily over toward her, wand in hand, Sirius scanned the room for Harry and Ron. Hermione pulled her own wand as she reached him, and Sirius tucked her into his side just as the crowd erupted into chaos. Guests were sprinting in all directions. Many were disapparating. The protective enchantments around the burrow had broken. "Harry!" Hermione screamed. "Ron!" "Hermione!" Harry shouted, pushing his way toward them. Shortly behind Harry, Ron appeared. "We need a safe place to hide," he pointed out as Sirius rushed them away from the panicking crowd. "Grimmauld Place," Harry suggested. "Don't be ridiculous, Harry. Snape can get in there," Hermione said. Ron's dad said they'd put up jinxes against him, and even if they haven't worked, he pressed on, interrupting Hermione as she opened her mouth to argue. "So what? I swear, I'd like nothing better than to meet Snape." "But, Hermione, where else is there? It's the best chance we've got. Snape's only one Death Eater." Sirius nodded in agreement. Harry's right. Apparate to the top step of number 12. You can't be seen from the street in case they've got people watching it. "Side along, then," Hermione insisted, "or else we'll end up knocking each other over once we apparate." Paternal instincts kick in. Sirius automatically took Harry's arm, grateful when Hermione grabbed Ron's. He would have liked to have been able to take all three individually for safety reasons, but time was not on their side. On the count of 3, the 4 turned on the spot, vanishing into the compressed darkness. Sirius stepped into the house first. The moment that the front door closed behind them, the old-fashioned gas lamp lit up in the front hallway, casting light on the spun cobwebs that draped from one wall to the other. It was eerily quiet, and the stale smell of neglect hung in the air. A thick layer of dust covered the framed artwork, the lamp fixtures, and the row of house elf heads still hanging on the wall. It looked exactly as he had last left it. The only thing even slightly out of place was the troll-leg umbrella stand laying on its side as though Tonks had just knocked it over again. "I think someone's been in here," Hermione whispered, pointing towards the troll-leg. "That could have happened as the order left," Ron murmured back. Harry frowned and studied the shadows on the walls. "So where are the jinxes they put up against Snape?" "Maybe they're only activated if he shows up," Ron suggested. Sirius moved ahead, glancing back to see the teenagers standing close together, their backs against the door, looking afraid to move further into the house. He did not blame them. "Well, we can't stay here forever," Harry said, and he took a step forward, joining Sirius. Moody's voice whispered out of darkness, "Severus Snape?" "Do I look like an ugly git to you?" Sirius snapped. "We're not bloody Snape." A few more curses and jinxes meant to trap Snape were easily averted by the 4, though the thing that made the younger 3 jump highest was the screeching sound of Sirius's mother's portrait in the hallway. "Mudbloods, filth, stains of dishonor, how dare you taint the walls of the House of Black?" "Shut up!" Harry and Sirius bellowed simultaneously. With an explosion of red sparks from Harry's wand, the curtain swung shut, silencing the painting. "I'm gone a year, and no one's thought of anything better than curtains yet?" Sirius questioned the three, who all shrugged in response. He sighed and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Hell, I'm just going to plaster over the old bitch when we're done with this bloody war." Shivering slightly in the drawing room, Hermione perched on the sofa, hugging her knees to her chest. Instinctively, Sirius made his way to her and wrapped an old blanket he had pulled out of a nearby cupboard around her quivering form. She smiled up at him gratefully before her focus switched to Ron, who was peering through the windows. "Can't see anyone out there," he announced. "Harry?" Hermione asked worriedly. Hermione's voice drew Sirius's attention to his godson. The polyjuice had finally faded completely, which would have been a happy sight, except that Harry wincing in pain and clutching at his forehead. The image, he was certain, had taken years off of Sirius's life as the panic raised in his chest. "Harry!" "What did you see?" Ron asked, advancing forward. "Did you see him at my place?" "No, I just felt anger. He's really angry." "But that could be at the burrow," Ron said worriedly. "What else? What did you see? Was he cursing someone?" "No, I just felt anger. I couldn't tell." "He's still connected to you?" Sirius asked with concern, pushing Ron out of Harry's face. "I thought that had been fixed by teaching you occlumency." He looked to Hermione, hoping for answers, as Harry had still caught up in the aftershocks of the painful vision. "He never finished his lessons," he disclosed. "Snape refused." "That prick! Dumbledore was supposed to set him straight." Sirius growled, reminding himself that Snape was a traitor and had likely stopped the sessions on purpose to keep Harry from blocking out Voldemort. "Then we'll pick it back up." "I'm not the best at it, mind you," he admitted. That was certainly an understatement. Memories of the first time he had tried occlumency still made him slightly nauseated, but better than ignoring it and letting that sick snake inside your head. Harry exhaled. "Thanks, Sirius." Hermione shrieked. The other three drew their wands in response, spinning around to see a silver Patronus soar through the drawing room window and land on the floor in front of them, where it solidified into the weasel that spoke with Arthur's voice. "Family safe. Do not reply. We are being watched." The Patronus dissolved into nothingness, and Ron let out a noise between a whimper and a groan, dropping onto the sofa. Hermione joined him, gripping his arm. Sirius walked over and patted the boy on the shoulder. "See? Takes more than the Ministry falling and a wedding being attacked by Death Eaters to take down a Weasley shindig." He chuckled, trying to ease the tension. Ron gave a half-hearted smile in response. "We should get some rest," Hermione insisted as she grabbed her beaded bag, reaching in and pulling out a stack of bedclothes. "Undetectable extension charm?" he inquired, and she silently confirmed. "Haven't seen one of those in years." He gratefully took the clothes offered to him. Though he wondered if his bedroom upstairs had been left alone, he probably would have things to wear in there. But the idea of revisiting old times just now was not appealing. Best wait for the morning. July 2nd, 1997. Blinking his eyes open, Padfoot glanced around the room, quietly groaning at the reminder of where he was. The arm draped over his furry body, however, was a pleasant surprise. Not wanting to be separated, Sirius had insisted they all sleep in the drawing room for the night. Ron had a fit of gallantry and insisted that Hermione sleep on the sofa cushions. Sirius, irritated that he had not thought of that first, had shifted into Padfoot and crawled in between Ron and Hermione, settling down on the floor beside her for the night. A narrow beam of light was invisible between the gap in the heavy curtains. It was the cool, clear blue of watered ink, somewhere between night and dawn, and it was quiet, save for the slow, deep breaths coming from Ron and Hermione. Glancing up, he saw Harry stretching his arms above his head, his hair in more disarray than normal, which was truly saying something. Though it was easy to remember that the two were separate individuals, the silhouette that Harry created against the light in the room was a painful reminder of James. Padfoot stretched out his front paws and then back, shaking out his fur, drawing Harry's attention. He nodded toward the door, waiting for Harry to take his cue before he looked down at the sleeping girl next to him. Leaning forward, he pulled the sleeve of her fallen arm up with his teeth and set it back down on the cushions. He glanced at Harry as he walked out of the room before making his way up the staircase, shifting back into his human form mid-step, Harry following close behind. "What an asshole," Sirius growled after opening his bedroom door, looking inside to see that his room had been completely torn apart. He could still smell Snape's presence there, though the greasy git had clearly vacated months ago. Grimmauld Place must have been the traitor's first stop after murdering Dumbledore. "I take it you didn't do this?" Harry asked as he walked in behind Sirius. "No, I'll admit to being messy, but I have respect for my own stuff," Sirius grumbled as he made his way to a stack of papers and fallen photographs, most of which were himself, James, and Sirius with Peter's face scratched out of them. He was glad to see that Snape had not snatched up the few photos he had left of Lily. Sirius smiled at the living memories as they danced on paper in front of his eyes and handed them over to Harry. "Here you go. Save them for you." Harry hesitated before taking them. "You should keep some of these, Sirius." "Got my own copies, and then some." Sirius inclined his head toward a large, locked box near the bed. He picked up his wand and waved it over the rusty container, smiling when it glowed gold for a brief moment. Still intact. "You'd need a bloody curse breaker to get into that thing." What have you got in there other than pictures?" "Pictures are enough. Memories keep you grounded when the rest of the world goes to shit," Sirius explained, leaving the details murky. He picked up an old copy of A History of Magic from the floor and tossed it on top of the locked box. "Oh, damn." He picked up a crumpled piece of parchment, feeling heavy-hearted. "Here," he said, and handed it to Harry. "It's a letter your mom wrote me." Sirius smiled softly as he watched Harry get a little teary-eyed at Lily's words. "We had a cat?" Harry asked with a laugh. Sirius chuckled unconsciously, rubbing at scratch marks on his arms that had healed years ago. "I hated that fucking beast. It used to be mine." He cleared his throat, lost in emotion. "But we didn't get along so great, so I handed it off to your mom." "Harry? Sirius?" "Up here, love," Sirius called. "What's happened?" There was a clatter of footsteps outside the door, and Hermione burst inside, looking exasperated and relieved all at once. "We woke up and didn't know where you were," she said breathlessly before turning and yelling over her shoulder, "Ron, I've found them." Ron's annoyed voice echoed distantly from several floors below. "Good, tell them from me that they're both gits." "Harry, don't just disappear, please. We were terrified," she exclaimed, calming down as she took a good look around the room. "Did you make all this mess, or was some of it done when you were gone?" She glanced suspiciously at Sirius and narrowed his eyes back at her. "Sorry," Hermione held up both hands as a sign of surrender. "Why don't you both come down and we'll put together some breakfast?" The three left Sirius's room, closing the door behind them, and heading back down the stairs. Sirius close on Hermione's heels, with Harry lagging behind. As they passed a door on the right, out of bitter habit, Sirius made a fist and punched the sign that hung on it as he continued down the stairs. "Hermione, Sirius, come back up here," Harry said. Hermione looked back up the stairs. "What's the matter, Harry?" "I think I found him." Sirius looked back, concerned. "What's wrong? What'd you find?" "R.A.B. You found... Oh my god! How did I not put that together?" Hermione said excitedly as she reached her landing. She smiled and hugged Harry tightly, and then reached out for Sirius as he approached the two of them, Ron coming up behind him. "Someone want to clue me in?" "You found R.A.B.?" Ron asked. "What's R.A.B.?" Sirius scanned the room carefully. Surely they didn't mean Regulus. What the hell would these three need from his dead brother? "Fake locket Horcrux that Dumbledore and Harry found had a note in it from one of the you-know-who's followers, Hermione explained to him. One who defected and stole his Horcrux, intending to destroy it. Good for him, sticking it to the old... Wait, RAB? No, Sirius shook his head. Absolutely not. It fits, Sirius, Harry said. No, Sirius growled, remembering the last time he had seen his younger brother complete with Death Eater regalia. Regulus was a Death Eater. He was a bloody idiot who bought into all the pure blood nonsense that my parents taught us. Would you recognize his handwriting? Hermione asked, reaching into her beaded bag and pulling out a fake locket. As she popped it open, a small piece of folded parchment tumbled out. Sirius took it quickly and opened it immediately, recognizing the script. He and Regulus had been forced to go through penmanship lessons since the moment they could hold a quill. As usual, Sirius had rebelled and scribbled his way through most of his early years, only appreciating the need for proper penmanship when he had began writing love letters to girls in school. It also set his notes apart from James's, which looked like a bunch of bowtruckles had gone swimming in an inkwell and then flopped around on a piece of parchment. Regulus, on the other hand, obeyed from the outset, as always, and set to prove he had the most beautiful handwriting. It doesn't prove a thing. Why does it matter? Regulus is dead and we have a fake locket, Sirius said brusquely. Would you be okay with us searching his room for the real one? Harry asked. Have fun. I'll be downstairs. Sirius turned and fled the landing, making his way past drawing room to the back door, which he popped open before pulling out the pack of cigarettes he kept in his leather jacket. Tapping one out, Sirius reached for his wand and used a small fire-making spell to light it. He took a deep drag and exhaled slowly, as though this one small stick would keep him from breaking. Sirius? I'm fine, Hermione, he answered before she bothered asking. Did you find it? Not yet. Harry and Ron are still looking, Hermione replied as she approached him. Good luck to them, then, he said bitterly. She pointed at the cigarette. That's a disgusting habit. He grinned at her. You might not always think that. It's helpful when you're stressed. Pursing her lips in disapproval, she opened her mouth again to say something when a loud crash echoed from upstairs, followed by Ron shouting down. We're fine. Everything's fine. Hermione sighed and shook her head, crossed her arms, and stepped closer to Sirius. Tell me about your brother. Sirius groaned as he blew his smoke out the side of his mouth away from her face. Why couldn't she ever just let things be? Maybe another time, love, he demurred. The last time he opened up and talked about his brother had been a long time ago, a memory he was not ready to revisit. She tried to reason with him. If this is true, that means he didn't die for nothing. Still dead, though. Was there a funeral? Sirius sighed, giving up and flicking the cigarette through the opening of the door, closing it behind him quickly to avoid the cold. I imagine so. I wasn't invited. I got a lovely letter from my mother telling me that my father and brother were both dead. That's awful. That was typical. So you didn't even get to say goodbye? Not in the way you're thinking. He moved and sat down in the armchair, putting the pack of cigarettes back in the pocket of his jacket. I said goodbye to them all the moment they blasted me off that tree in the other room. When Reg died, though, he paused as he considered whether or not he should say anything more. I said goodbye by drinking my way through a bottle of fire whiskey with a girlfriend. At least you weren't alone, Hermione noted, but there was a hint of bitterness in her tone. Sirius grinned at the way she answered him, wondering if that was jealousy he was picking up on. No, not that time, he continued on, not wanting to point out the brief look of anger on her face. We got drunk, and she made up stories about my family, said that deep down they were all good people caught up in bad situations. Lovely fairy tales. The fragment of nostalgia that had momentarily lit up his face faded, made me feel better until I sobered up. Hermione patted his shoulder. maybe they weren't fairy tales. We'll see. And that's the end of chapter 5. Thank you for listening.